Good morning and welcome to our webinar using the Akamai Property Manager API and CLI. Thank you very much to everyone on the line for taking time to join us. My name is Jessica Mills and I'm a Marketing Manager on the Developer Relations team here at Akamai. I'm very excited to introduce Kirsten Hunter, our API Evangelist, and Jay Sickerland, our Senior Product Manager, who will walk us through the Property Manager API and CLI. Jay is going to start us off with a quick background on the Akamai platform and will then take us through what the Property Manager API is, along with real-world examples on how to use it. And Kirsten will do the same with the Akamai CLI, along with a demo of the product, and we'll give you a sneak peek at what's to come with custom behaviors. At the end, we'll make sure we have time for you to ask questions, so please feel free to send any questions you might have in the QA module that you see throughout the webinar. If for any reason we don't get to your question, we'll be sure that we follow up afterwards with you directly. Following the webinar, we'll also send a link of the recording to all registrants. I will now hand it over to Jay to get us started.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Jay Sickerland. I'm going to start this presentation by going over just at the high level, what you'll be doing at the low level a little later on with the API interactions and the CLI. So the Akamai platform, as you may know, is the world's largest and most distributed CDN, 200,000 plus servers, 1,600 something networks, or 130 countries, close to 3 trillion requests per day. The vast majority of the world's internet users are one hop away from an Akamai server. On top of this platform, Akamai has a bunch of different products, and in various areas like web performance, security, and media delivery. And they all have different feature sets depending on what kind of use case you have. If you have a SaaS application or an e-commerce website or live or on-demand streaming or software downloads, you'll be using different products and different feature sets that all run on top of servers in this on the Akamai platform. And depending on what product and feature set you use, you'll have a bunch of different things to configure. But they all pretty much have two things in common. In order to deliver HTTP traffic over Akamai, you need at least two things. You need an edge hostname to map your end users to the closest or most appropriate, most optimal edge server on at that given time. And this is done via a CNAME. So you'll take your host name and CNAME that over to an Akamai edge hostname. So that will get you to the right server, most optimal server at that time. The second thing you need is an HTTP delivery configuration. And that's where all the rules are for how to deliver your content, including what to cache, what not to cache, how long to cache it for, how to get to your origin to pull down content, any kind of acceleration features, redirects, etc. They're all stored in this HTTP delivery configuration. So with those two things, you have everything you need. Well, you'll have the basic of what you need, and then different products will use other configuration settings as well. Property Manager is the application that lets you manage both edge hostnames and the HTTP delivery configuration. So that covers most of our products. And the Property Manager uses, behind the scenes, the Property Manager API, also known as PAPI. And so you see here on this little diagram here, we have the Property Manager UI that you access through the Akamai portal. and that talks to Pappy. Pappy then makes requests out to our platform to push configurations, whether it's edge host names or HTTP delivery configuration files out to the platform. The Akamai CLI, which Kirsten will be going over and showing some demo of later on, also uses Pappy behind the scenes. And the CLI is kind of an easier to use version of the raw Pappy API. And Pappy can be a little complex, has a lot of options and bells and whistles. Takes a little bit longer to get up and running. The CLI will let you do most of the things you can do with Pappy, but you get up and running much, much faster. There's also an onboarding and configuration assistant. That's kind of a wizard in the Akamai portal that lets you quickly onboard new properties. And it automates a lot of the steps that Property Manager UI doesn't do for you, just for initial onboarding, typically. And that also uses Pappy on the back end. So today we'll be focusing on, we will show you some demos of real-world implementations and usage of Pappy as well as the CLI. Quick word on what we're actually managing. When we talk about a property file or a config, in the Pappy world or Property Manager world, that translates into a JSON file. You'll see this on the left here of the slide. This file is also sometimes referred to as the rule tree or as just a config file. And it's a JSON file with all the settings for how to deliver your content on the platform. So you'll see here that you have things like the origin host name and what the caching should be, for instance. Before we push that file over to the platform, it gets converted to an XML format, also known as metadata. And that's the actual physical file or the set of files that get pushed out to the platform by Pappy. So just keeping that in mind. You can see, you can access both of these. You can pull down both of them to Pappy. You can get the JSON format is what you normally would work with, but you can also retrieve the XML as well if you want to look at that. So the demo, the first demo you're going to see is using Pappy to create a temporary test environment for a new functionality that you're developing. In this case, the new functionality is you come up with a failover configuration or a failover functionality where instead of serving standard 403 deny messages for certain restricted content, you will be pulling up some special files to show the user a more user-friendly experience. And this is like in development now. There's a team at your company that's developing this new new functionality, and they have their own separate test environment and test origin where this new functionality is on, and this has a separate test host name, and we'll be using a separate Akamai test configuration to make some changes to the Akamai settings to work with this new functionality. So why would you do this? There's a couple of different reasons why. Although we have a staging environment at Akamai where you can take your production config or your production environment and push make some changes to it to the production config and push it to our staging network and run some tests And then if it's working fine, you can then push it to production. But that doesn't work in all cases. Like for instance, if this new functionality that you're developing, you may need to test it for a long time, maybe days or weeks. And if you use the Akamai staging network with your production config, then you kind of locked up the flow here. And then if other changes need to go into production, you then have to revert what you have on staging, and it becomes kind of cumbersome to to manage the different changes. Also, you could have multiple teams working on your website. It's not uncommon that you have, in some cases, dozens of different teams working on different parts of the site, and they might be testing different things completely independent of each other. And so to have all of them try to manage one Akamai config file and make changes to it becomes hard or impossible to manage. So that's why in this scenario we're going to set up a test Akamai test config, which is going to be kind of like initially it's going to be a clone of the production environment, and then we're going to make some changes to it and push it to staging so that I could actually push it to Akamai production as well, this test config, so that the team that's developing this new failover functionality can do their testing.
So as I mentioned in the intro, in this scenario, we're going to test some new failover functionality for a special 403 deny response. And I'll be using HTTPy with the Akamai EdgeGrid plugin to execute PAPI requests. And then we'll log into the Akamai portal to see the results of the PAPI requests. One note before I start is that the PAPI request and the PAPI JSON can be pretty complex. And I have saved the requests used in the demo so I can just copy and paste them. Basically a cheat sheet. First things, let's find the active production config and the test config that we are going to use in this scenario. So here I've logged into the portal, and you can see there's a prod config and a test config. So first order of business is let's find the prod config using PAPI. And to do that, I'll use the PAPI search endpoint, and I'll find the property by value and using the property name. So in this case, my property name is prod www.akamlab.com, and there it is. It returned the config. I'm going to make a note of the contract ID and the group ID, since we'll be using those parameters in subsequent calls. Now let's take a look at the actual rule tree, which is all the config settings for this config. Now I'm downloading version 2 of the production config, and there is the rule tree. Let's take a look at this JSON for a second here. It's pretty small, just has a default rule with an origin, host name, and a CP code. One thing to note here is the rule format. This is actually very important. By default, Akamai sets the quote-unquote latest rule format on a new config, and that means that whenever Akamai makes any changes to our platform, add new features or fix bugs, they're automatically applied to your properties when you use the Property Manager UI. That's not always desirable when you're using PAPI or the command line interface, because it could break things. So we highly recommend that you use this frozen rule format, and we create a new one just about every 6 months. You can go into the developer.akamai.com documentation for PAPI and look up how to fix the rule format for your config. This is very important for supportability of your apps. Okay, now I can also pull down the XML version of the config file, and this is the actual file that gets deployed to the platform, to the 175,000 edge servers. Let's look at this. This is the XML representation of the JSON that we just looked at. So you see it has all the same settings, origin server up here, CP code down here. Okay. Since we already have a test config in this scenario, I'm gonna use that. We could have created a brand new config here, but it takes a little longer. So for demo purposes, I'm gonna use an existing config and manipulate and edit that. So here you see the test config, test-www.akamlab.com. So let me pull that down. Again, using the same PAPI search endpoint. And there it is. Notice that the contract ID, group ID is the same. The property ID, which is the main key here, is different. And I'm going to also look and see if there's any existing other versions of this file, because the search endpoint by default only returns configuration versions that are active on production or staging. And in this case, I can see here that there's two versions of this test config. One that's active on production and staging, and then one that's inactive. And the inactive one we'll use for this demo, so I can actually update this config version without creating a new one. So I'll just edit this version 2. Since it's inactive, it'll let me overwrite it. Typically in the real world scenario, you'll be creating a new version here. The first edit that we'll do is we need to replace the CP code and the origin with the proper test CP code and origin. So I'm going to do that real quick here. Edit the prod config .json file. Copy and paste in the origin and CP code. Now, next edit that we'll do is to add this custom functionality that we'll be testing out. And I've prepared the JSON for this new rule, and here's the JSON file for this new failover functionality. And what it does is it matches on a 403 deny response and serves an alternate file from a different origin, passing the response code in a query string. And this custom failover logic is implemented using advanced metadata that used to require manual intervention from Akamai Professional Services every time you wanted to edit it. And we're about to launch a new feature called Property Manager Custom Behaviors, which lets you self-service these advanced metadata snippets across all your configs using either the Property Manager UI, PAPI, or the command line interface. Custom Behaviors is currently in pilot testing by a few customers and partners, with the general availability planned for sometime in the September-October timeframe. And this is really a key enabler for not just self-service in general, but DevOps automation. So the first thing I'll do here is I'll get a list of all the, just to show what the custom behaviors, what custom behaviors are available in this particular account. I'll get a listing here. And we can see here that this particular account has one custom behavior available. And you can see it's called custom behavior failover 443 error. That's the one we want to use and test. And you can see the advanced XML in here. And so now let's go and copy this rule that I have concocted with the using the custom behavior. I'm using the behavior ID that I got back in the response over here. Here's the behavior ID, so I'm using that in the JSON. And now I'm going to go back to the prod config.json and edit that and add in this this new rule. We can see here that the current JSON just has a default rule with no children, so there's no subrules right now. So I'm going to add in this failover rule, and I'm not going to worry so much about the indents and all that. Next thing I'm going to do is that this custom behavior, in order to make it more reusable and more generic, it's using some user-defined variables to specify where to fail over to and what path to fail over to. So there's a PM user failover host and a PM user failover path. So I'm going to add those as variables to this config. Go back into the JSON here, and at the bottom of the config file is a variable section, and I am gonna paste in those two variables. Okay, looks good. Now I think my test config JSON is good to go. Before I upload it, let's go in to the portal and open the test config. Here's the version 2 that I'll be using. Okay, so you see, this is before I've edited it. Just has the default rule, no variables. Okay, so now let's go and upload this config. I'm gonna use the put property version and take the prod config.json as input. I'm uploading it to version 2 of the test config. Okay, that came back okay. Let's go in the property manager UI now and hit refresh and see what happened. All right. First thing to note, you notice here there are the two variables were added to the config, and they're initialized with these proper values. And we can see the 403 failover rule has been added. I can click on that, and I can see here that it looks good. It's matching on the 403 response code, and then it triggers this advanced metadata here that was added for me automatically. So that's it. Now the next step is to upload this, or I'm sorry, to activate this config on staging or production so you can run your tests. And I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to run the activation. I've saved my activation settings in a testactivation.json file. It looks like this. Tells me where I want to activate it to, in this case staging, and what version I want to activate. Now, for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to activate version 1 here in this call, and which is not the version that we just edited, but if I did that, I would have to start the demo over again every time. So for now, I'm just going to show you what it would look like if you did the activation with a version that's already active. So I'm getting an error here. That's totally expected because this version is already active on staging. If I had specified version 2 here, then it would have activated version 2, but then I couldn't edit it anymore. So that's why for the demo, I'm just gonna show you how to do it. And in your real world environment, you would have now activated version 2, and then once it's active, it takes about a minute or two to staging. You could then run all your tests and then move on.
Great. Thank you so much, Jay. For those of you who've submitted questions along the way, just a reminder that we'll be sure to answer them at the end of the webinar. Kirsten, please go ahead and take it away with the Akamai CLI.
I'm here today to talk about the new Akamai CLI. The Akamai CLI is your toolkit for seamless integration with the Akamai Intelligent Platform. The Property Manager API is incredibly powerful, and it supports a huge number of use cases. Our customers who wanted to work with properties outside of Luna asked for an interface with less complexity. Along with this, customers asked for an easier way to interact with other systems on our platform, such as Purge. Enter the Akamai CLI. This toolkit was designed to make common tasks easy by expressing what you need right on the command line. The toolkit is a framework built to grow and extend for our developer community. This project represents a new model of development for Akamai. These are community projects managed with GitHub. You can see the code we've created and contribute as you see fit to help us improve the system further. Issues will be addressed, pull requests will be reviewed. This will be managed like any other open source project. The first part of the CLI is the wrapper. The Akamai command gives you a common interface into Akamai subcommands so they're familiar and consistent. The command supports various actions. Let's take a look at the actions now. Starting with the base Akamai command, you can start to get a feel for how it works. This command gives you a list of actions and installed packages. Right now I don't have any packages installed, so I'll fix that by doing an Akamai install purge. This command will pull the subcommand into the environment. If a package manager command such as npm or pip is required for the installation, this will be done for you as well. You need to have the appropriate language installed on your system, but the Akamai install command will tell you when that's the case. In the case of Purge, it's written in Go. If you have Go, it will compile the binary for you from scratch. If you don't have Go, you will be offered the choice to install a precompiled binary on your system. The basic command for Akamai Purge takes an action. Let's take a look at the help to see what it says those actions are. So Akamai help purge. These are the commands and flags which can be used with Akamai Purge. You can see here that there's invalidate and delete options available. So let's use it. So Akamai purge, invalidate, and we'll purge my website. Great, we've got our output and the file has been purged. More generally, the install and update commands will pull the code from the Git repository where it lives and run the appropriate installer. The Akamai command is language neutral. While the base command is written and compiled in Go for major platforms, subcommands can be written in any language. The property subcommand, for example, is written in Node. Besides Go and Node, we're currently working on visitor prioritization and image manager subcommands using Python. All of these will be able to be managed by the same tool. The second subcommand, property, is much more extensive. This subcommand wraps common property manager tasks into an easy interface. The tasks needed to do a simple task like creating a new property without the CLI look like this. Definitely manageable, but a lot of steps to do something fairly straightforward. I'll install the property subcommand now with Akamai install property. This is going to take a few moments while it fetches the code from GitHub, brings it into the system. It's already made sure that I have Node installed so I can run the property command. And here in the resulting list, you can see property along with purge. To create a new property using the CLI, you just do this. Akamai property create, we'll call it webinar.example.com, and we'll clone Jenkins base property. The first part of the create command can take some time because all of the hosts and host names need to be pulled for the account in order to find that host and use it as the base for the clone. This is optimized where possible to use the newer features of the Property Manager API, but this functionality only works for activated properties. In this case, the base property I used for the Jenkins clone properties has been activated, and that's what I'm using, so it's found relatively quickly and the command can get on with the fun stuff. Akamai property create does all the work for you, creating the property, cloning based on another property if requested, updating the CP code, hostname, and origin. For any property manager interaction, you might want to work with the property based on the property name or any of the host names, and this functionality is built into Akamai property. Let's take a look at the property in Luna, our web portal. You can see it here, and we'll choose the first version to look at. So click on the property, scroll down to the version, and click on the version. And now we're going to go take a look at the settings in the property manager. And you can see we have an origin server host name. We're using the content provider code from the base property that we pulled over, so everything looks good. But maybe we decided to change the origin. When creating a new property, the origin can be passed in as an argument, but you can also modify a configuration using Akamai property. To figure out how to do that, let's go back to the terminal and enter Akamai property to see what the subcommands are. So there's the list, and modify looks promising. So an Akamai property modify -- help should tell us what flags are available. Right up here, you can see that we can pass the origin as a flag and it will modify that for the property. So let's give that a try. Akamai property modify webinar.example.com origin webinar.example.com. The startup time will be a little bit longer here, as we do need to search all the properties to find the one we just created. It hasn't been activated yet, so won't show up in the Property Manager Search API. So while it runs, I'll mention some other information about the Akamai property create command. When you're creating properties from scratch, you can let the command create a new CP code for your new properties, but when cloning, customers have said they prefer to bring the CP code over to the new property. Another thing that the property command does is set the rule format for you. Keeping your property set to latest, which is likely what the property template has, will introduce instability into your system, so newly cloned properties are given the most recent fixed rule format. Now that the modify is done, we can retrieve the rules and see what happened. We'll use those rules to validate that the origin change happened correctly. The command for this is Akamai property retrieve, and we're looking for webinar.example.com. I'm going to save it out to a file, and we'll call it rules.json. Now it's done, and I'm going to open it up in Vim, and we can check out the origin. So Vim rules.json. And let's look for the origin in the rules. And you can see it was set to Colin Bendel before, and now it's set to originwebinar.example.com. So the modify that we did worked correctly. The property has been updated. One side note, this technique gives you the opportunity to create a local data store of property information. In fact, we have an example of a data store command in our API Bootcamp repository. Feel free to ask if you're interested in that. It goes through the entire account and pulls the information for each property version and stores everything in a Git repository you can query for activated features, CP codes, or other elements. This can be found in our API Kickstart repository under the Akamai organization in GitHub. It's currently being rewritten to work under the CLI umbrella, but it's a good example to understand why this functionality is useful. Activation and deactivation work the same way they do in our web portal, and deploying your configuration to all 220,000 servers does take some time. So you can expect around 5 minutes for an activation on staging and 15 minutes for an activation to production. I won't demonstrate them here, but these tasks can be done with Akamai property activate property name and Akamai property deactivate property name. Let's take a look at a Jenkins installation that does the activation and deactivation of a newly created property. This is the dashboard for all our testing jobs. We have them set up to test our example code as well as the Akamai property functionality. The job we're looking for is CLI ephemeral. It runs through the whole life cycle for a property and lets us know if there are issues. From here, let's take a look at the configuration. Scrolling down to the script area, you can see Akamai property commands to create, update, activate, and deactivate, and finally delete the property. So now we know what Jenkins is doing. Let's take a look at the output to see what's happening in more detail. So we'll go back and take a look at one of the jobs and look at the console output. Scroll down past the installation stuff. And we have the create here. We retrieve it, update it, but what we're interested in is seeing how the activation works. So what we see here is it is acknowledging the warnings coming back from the Property Manager API before doing the activation, and then it's going to poll as it waits for the activation to complete. So this means that you can use this in an automated way, knowing that when the script completes, the activation will have completed. We're looking to add new subcommands to the system, especially as contributions from the community. As I mentioned, we currently have new visitor prioritization and image manager commands in development, both written using Python. The CLI packages can all be found under the Akamai organization on GitHub. Additional resources are on the slide. The CLI is a core piece of our Akamai for DevOps program, and we're excited for you to try it out.
Great. Thanks so much, Kirsten. Before we move into Q&A, I just wanted to point out that we have links to additional resources within the resource list that you see on the right-hand side. So be sure to check those out. Now we can move into Q&A, but if anyone has anything additional that you haven't yet submitted, please feel free to submit them now. Let's start with our first question from Didier. I think this one's for you, Jay. We're wondering if you can see the differences between the different versions of the rule format.
Yep, good question. It is possible. There's two different ways you can do it. There's a get rule format schema endpoint that will give you the whole the schema object for a particular rule format, and then you can compare one rule format against another. You can also use the get available. There's an endpoint to get a list of available behaviors and matches for the rule format that you're currently using. So you could switch to one rule format and then do a get on the available matches and behaviors, because that takes into account like everything, not just the rule format, but also the product and the and any modules that you have. So you can get the list that way. But then if you want to compare with another rule format, you would have to then switch your config to that rule format and then do another get on the list of available behaviors and matches.
Great. Thank you so much. And the next question from Sai, this one's for you, Kirsten. Can the properties be created and cloned from CLI on a specific version or with different property type?
So I'm not sure for different property types. From different versions, that's something that is just being added right now for the CLI. So you should be able to use the property is obviously going to start with version 1. So I'm not sure what you mean by different property types. So.
Okay. Sai, feel free to send another question if you want to expand on the property type. But next up, from Harish, is there a setup requirement for using the zone transfer API? Know the answer to that
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if Kirsten, if you have any experience with the zone transfer API. It's not my specialty, but we can certainly follow up for you on that.
Great.
Yeah, I don't have direct experience with that one.
Okay, great. Then we'll follow up with that one. And then from Alex, is there a development or sandbox environment for such DevOps practices? Or do they have to use their real properties?
So there isn't currently. We're working on creating a developer account. But right now what you can do is create a test group and test properties within that test group. They can even point to your regular origin, and that gives you the opportunity to play with configuration changes without using your main website.
Great. And one more from Didier. When using the CLI, is the only way to reference a property via the name, or can they use a reference to speed up the commands? For example, he has over 300 properties.
Well, the CLI was just stated to be much faster and use name or hosting for an activated property, so that will help. You can use the property ID. It doesn't currently the property up much, although that's an enhancement that I am working on right now. So I encourage you to use the most recent version and see if the speed improvements make a difference for you.
Great. Thank you. A couple more questions. What if there are multiple, from Elvis, sorry, what if there are multiple origin host names and you want to modify only a specific one?
Yeah, so that's very straightforward. You get the JSON rule tree, the config file in JSON format, and in there you can there will be an entry for each of your origins, and you can go in and edit that as a file and just edit the one origin that you want to change, and then upload the file, and it's not going to affect the other origin that you didn't change.
And Kirsten Sai just responded about clarifying the property type. What they meant was, can they change the property type from DSA to ION?
Okay, I haven't put that in the CLI yet. I haven't done that within PAPI. So if that's something that you're interested in, or anyone is interested in changes or improvements to the CLI, I encourage you to go to the GitHub repository and open an issue so that I can interact with you and we can get that on the roadmap.
And I have a little anecdote on that, is that it's today not possible to change the product via PAPI or even in the Property Manager UI for customers, because there's a lot of issues around, there's a lot of other things that have to go along with a product change that today require you contacting professional services to change a property from one product to another. There's the edge host name needs to be updated, the CP codes need to be moved. Potentially you could have different features available in a new product. Presumably, hopefully, it's an upgrade, so it's a superset, but in some cases you may not have all the features available, and then it becomes kind of a complicated issue. So right now we've turned that off, so it's not possible to change the product at this point.
Thank you. And a question from Miriam. Do we have any automated scripts using Node.js, Ruby, Perl for modifying and updating properties?
That's what the CLI is designed for, is you can automate it. We actually use it in a Jenkins job. So because it's easy to use from the command line, it's easy to automate in most systems. The other thing I wanted to point out is there's a library, the Node.js library for the CLI. So you can actually use that library directly to perform your own automation.
Great. One more question from Chris. When using the CLI to purge a property, will there be a return response that can be used when building our own UI button to allow our site admins to purge content when deploying site changes?
You mean hopefully, so there's a return response that says that the purge was successful. There is not currently a status that you can check to see that it has completed. Is that complete within 5 seconds? If you get that successful purge response, you can know that the purge has been submitted to the system.
Okay, awesome. It looks like we've answered all of the questions, and we're just about at time. So that's a wrap. I hope that, thank you again for everyone that attended. I hope that we provided you with the tools and information that you need. Again, we'll send out a recording of this webinar to all registrants, as well as information on additional DevOps-focused webinars that will be coming soon. We'll see you next time. Thanks again, Kirsten and Jay.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Jessica.